Hi, welcome to the Pinoy RN, a podcast that provides insights into a variety of subjects relevant to Pinoy nurses. I am Jerome Babate from Sydney, Australia, but originally from the Philippines. We have a great show for you today. Today we're going to talk about Filipino Americans and their health status with our colleague from the United States of America. Asian Americans face health disparities in cancer, chronic diseases such as heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, mental health among elderly. This is the only U.S. population suffering cancer as a leading cause of death. In particular, Asian Americans have the highest incidence and mortality rates of liver and stomach cancer, the most preventable cancers, largely due to high prevalence of related infections such as hepatitis B. There's very limited data on cardiovascular disease in Asian Americans, and a few studies of cardiovascular disease have examined Asian American subgroups separately. Interestingly, we'll dive into the issue and look at Filipino American health status. Anyway, time to move on. Please welcome a prominent Filipino nurse leader in Texas and renowned nurse researcher, Dr. Danet Lapiz-Bluhm.
Good day, everyone. Good evening from San Antonio, Texas. I'm a faculty here at the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio. So I have formed a website which is called the Center for Filipino-American Health. And this website, it was made possible by funding from the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, which is in short just called PCORI. So PCORI is a special institution that funds projects that involves the community, patients, and caregivers so that we would have better patient outcomes. And I'm lucky enough to have been funded in order to engage Filipino-American communities in 5 states in the United States. This consists of California, Hawaii, Texas, New Jersey, and New York. Now, why Filipino-Americans? So we are the third largest group of Asians in the United States, and that number is growing. So as we know, a lot of the Americans, Filipinos outside of Philippines, especially here in America, are in the healthcare workforce. Nurses like us, doctors, we are also in agriculture, some engineering fields. And it is an expectation that we should be healthier, right? But we're not, unfortunately. So these statistics can be very staggering for those who do not know about this, but we have one of the highest percentage of diabetes, highest percentage of hypertension. Some of these numbers are comparable to minorities that are known to have these high percentages of these conditions. These are chronic conditions. So you may ask why. Studies that indicate that it's kind of a triple whammy for us Filipinos. We, as a culture, we remember our fiestas, you know, a big thing. We associate food with family, with good times, and being together. And so it's always celebratory. We want to celebrate. So that's food. Our foods are inherently salty. Remember the bagoong? And fatty, inasal, adobo, and fat in the adobo, remember? So other than that, we're not very sturdy people. So we take in fatty foods, but we also do not expend the energy. The third component that is coming out in the literature potentially is the role of genetics and genomics. If you remember your BMI, body mass index chart, the normal cutoff for BMI for overweight and then obese and so on and so forth is 25. But it has been coming out in the literature that actually for Filipino Americans and other Asian groups, that cutoff is actually lower. So it would seem that Filipinos appear small, thin, but we actually have a lot more body fat than the normal population. So it has been shown in one of the studies, I think it's Ancheta, that show that if the BMI is lower to 23, we have a better chance, a clinician has a better chance of diagnosing properly, good diagnosis of diabetes among Filipino Americans. So why am I interested in this? So there are some Filipino Americans and other researchers in the US that are doing some studies on Filipino Americans for Pinoys. Unfortunately, it's not big enough. The volume is not big enough. And oftentimes I go out to the community and they would talk about health, about Hispanic health, Latino health, white, Black, and others. So like all of us, we are actually among others. So I thought, it's about time that someone pays attention to us, but who would that be but us, right? So I started this project. I was given the grant, and we are out in the 5 states that I mentioned. These 5 states, we call it Nayan, in reference to the villages that we have in the Philippines, are co-led by Filipino nurse, who's a member of the Philippine Nurses Association of America, and a community leader who's a patient advocate. So I maybe have forgotten to mention that this model of research is called patient-centered outcomes research. So let's dissect that word. Patient outcomes research centered. So that means the patient itself, in this case, Filipino American, is the center of this research. Center doesn't mean that they are just the subject. Center means they are partners of research. So I, the researcher, do not decide on what are their healthcare research priorities. I ask the community. So these co-leaders who are in the 5 states, California, Hawaii, Texas, New York, and New Jersey, are asking key stakeholders, what are their main problems? What are their healthcare priorities? What are their issues with regards to accessing healthcare? How do they want, what are their barriers to healthcare? What are their strengths, the things that they have in place? And when we're finished with this project, how do they want to accept or receive the findings for their research? This was the thought. The hope is that these different NIANs in these different states would actually be autonomous and move forward the research programs, which they can then own and be able to sustain forward, so that they can move on, seek funding, maybe with my help, but they can also do it on their own as the community takes ownership of their issues. So what we've been finding out, we actually held a retreat among the leaders over the weekend here in San Antonio, Texas. So using the PCORI model, I asked the leaders, what are the top 10 issues that you have in the community? Mm-hmm. And what's coming out, of course, there are those conditions that are mentioned earlier, like diabetes, hypertension, obesity, kidney disease, arthritis, so on and so forth. Along with it, were issues with regard to healthcare insurance. So if they don't have healthcare insurance, they wouldn't have the preventive care that they need. We also have the way of approaching health where unless we're really, really very sick, which is really when things are critical, that's when we see the doctor, rather than more preventive approach to healthcare where we take care of ourselves along the way. The other thing that's coming out, as you mentioned in your introduction, and I kind of smiled when you said that, is that a lot of them do not understand. They do not understand what is being said during a consult. And so there is this kind of miscommunication, lack of communication, lack of understanding between the Filipino patient and that of the healthcare provider. And the other thing that's coming out is that they're, you know, they prefer to take care of themselves. So they are treating themselves with maybe like some herbs or some other things, like ordering stuff online, which may actually endanger their health. So yeah, I'm super thankful to the Philippine Nurses Association of America, or PNAA, and the Philippine Nurses Association Foundation for their assistance in this project. I am actually using, as mentioned earlier, my nurse leaders in the community are PNAA members. They are also leaders in their PNAA chapters. They're very, very active in the community. And it was through PNAA Foundation where, when I served as the chair of the research committee, that I actually was to write this project. So it was really the, you know, the encouragement of my titas and ates and kuyas and titos from the PNAA and PNAF that spurred me on to submit this grant and take care of our Filipino-American compatriots here in the United States. So so that infrastructure is very, very helpful. Through these nurses who are leaders, they assisted me in identifying community leaders who are very active in the community and who are patient advocate leaders, in order to be able to get them to lead the NIAN. So I would just like to thank, for example, my leaders. In California, I have Dr. Catherine Abramiago as the leader. The patient advocate leader is Ruby Assertion. In Hawaii, I have Miss Marianella Jacob as my academic research collaborator, and the patient advocate leader is Gina Lardizabal. In Texas, I have Dr. Pam Wendell as the academic research coordinator, and the patient advocate leader is Sheila Ikobeza. In New Jersey, I have Dr. Persephone Vargas, and as the ARC, academic research collaborator, and Paul is Lavaro, Miss Lavaro. And in New York, I have Dr. MJ Mary Jo, who is actually the the president-elect of PNAA, and her patient leader is Lisa Santos. Consultant to this project is the executive director of PNAA, Leo Felix Herrado, and Dr. Melinda Bender, who has extensive research in California for Filipino Americans, and our national patient advocate leader, a nurse here, Marietta de la Cruz. Please check out any local chapters. I think I believe we have 54 chapters, and we're almost in all states of America. And there is also, if there is no chapter in your state, we also have a member at large. So NAA.org is the website for our for membership to PNA. Share that it has been full of experiences, and what I share to everyone is that if you get yourself to be open to new adventures, it would take you places. So before I graduated my BSN from Cebu State College, now Cebu Normal University, I actually received a scholarship from the Australian International Development Association Bureau, or ADA, to study in Australia. So at that time, I'm not gonna name the year, was the start of the decade of the brain. I've always been interested in the brain, how it works, and how 2 people, 3, 4 people may have the same experience, but they come out differently. One would have a disorder, another would have growth, would have enriched life, the other one would have disease, and the other one nothing. So I've always wondered about that. So I actually majored in science, in neuroscience, while I was in the University of Queensland in Australia. And after I graduated there, I went back to Cebu State to complete my nursing degree, took the boards, and up to the board exams, but I was able to actually perform really well in my undergrad, that I received an extension of my scholarship to do an honors year at the University of Queensland in Australia. So I completed that, came back to the Philippines, did a couple of stints, and then I worked in Thailand for a little bit on the admin side of things, and did a pre-doc over in Karolinska Institute. I don't know if you know about that university. It's actually the university that awards people for the Nobel Prize in medicine and physiology. And then I started my PhD over at the University of Nottingham in England. And so while in England, I actually registered as a nurse. I worked as a nurse in England, one of the earlier nurses who worked there. And I did my postdoc at Lundbeck in Denmark. And then another postdoc here at University of Texas Health Science Center, where I registered as a nurse, as an RN here, and able to work at the School of Nursing. I met my husband here, and the rest is history. So I has been very blessed along the way, and I found that being in the science field, having science as part of my portfolio was really something that was a transferable skill that allowed me to work across these boundaries. So I encourage nurses, we as Filipino nurses, I think we're very special in terms of our preparation, because we are actually taught research, and we have a very strong research background. I think we need to tap on that. Aside from our expertise in the clinical area, I think there's a lot to be said with research propelling progress, finding evidence for the things that we do in the clinical setting. So we just don't accept the way we things do, like it is something that, if you really look at some of the things that we do, there were some random numbers that were created by people, and some of them do not even have evidence for it. So,
well, that's all for today's episode of Pinoy RN. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Dr. Danet Lapiz-Bluhm, for joining me today. Join us again next time to talk about Filipino nurses and nursing. Make sure you subscribe to the Pinoy RN podcast on YouTube so you'll never miss an episode. Also, follow us on Facebook at Pinoy RN Podcast.